Hello, everyone, and welcome to Wisdom Wednesday. We are excited to have you join us today. We're very excited about the program and the conversation. I'm Kristen Eshelman. I am Director of Innovation Initiatives at Davidson College, and I'm also one of the partners at the Charlotte Center. I'm here really just to kick us off and to remind everyone that this is intended to be a conversation. So we invite you to engage with us in the chat. We would also invite you at different points in the conversation if you'd like to join us on stage and ask questions of Stick. Please feel free to do that at any point and DM me if you have any questions. And what I'll do now is turn it over to Angela to get us started.
Thank you, Kristen. Hello and welcome to Wisdom Wednesdays. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Angela Gala, and I'm with the Charlotte Center for the Humanities and Civic Imagination, the Charlotte Center for short. To begin our event, I want to read you a little something that reminds me of my conversations with today's guest, Stick Williams. This is from Ralph Waldo Emerson's essay, Spiritual Laws. We side with the hero as we read or paint, against the coward and robber. But we have been ourselves that coward and robber, and shall be again, not in the low circumstance, but in comparison with the grandeurs possible to the soul. In Stick, I found grandeurs possible to the soul. I'm interested in what we will find together. Wisdom Wednesdays is a series of conversations between us. It is us together being onto something. I would like to thank our sponsor and partner, Ortho Carolina, for this series, along with all of our donors and supporters for their investment and efforts in our community. You make our work possible. And I'm proud to be part of this team at the Charlotte Center. We are a community forum and civic action catalyst that invites people into meaningful connection and problem solving, informed by a deep understanding of the human experience. Our mission is to inspire and equip citizens to engage in enlightened civic action. We believe the more we know about ourselves and the human experience, the wiser we are in what we do. So I first met Stick Williams over email collaborating on a project. Well, it's not entirely true. He is the chairman and I was the hired help. In just a few words, he made certain everyone on that email knew that it was his intention to get this done and to get it done now. I was grateful that the directive was not directed at me, but in support of me doing my job. The power behind his few words was visceral and its effect was immediate. My subsequent interactions with him were also professional, but fun and lighthearted. The work was getting done, so he was free to be himself and he was creative. We had fun before we even met. When I finally met him in person, I witnessed his effortless way of powering through an injury to get the job done he had set out to do, and all with humor and the utmost professionalism and stamina. Our conversations in between told me there was more to him than I could tease out in a jam-packed day of work. This leader was clearly leading in service to something. So began the work of finding out his story. So who is Stick Williams? There's the official biography. He is retired Vice President of Corporate Community Affairs at Duke Energy Corporation and President of the Duke Energy Foundation. Over his 37-year career at Duke Energy, he held various positions in his company and many philanthropic roles regionally and nationally. In retirement, he is a very rare non-C-suite executive to many national and local boards and a tireless philanthropic soul. But then there's also the person behind his achievements, and that's what we're interested in today. Welcome, Stick, to Wisdom Wednesdays. So I want to start where you and I first connected. You said something to me, and forgive me if I paraphrase this poorly, but you said, Angela, I just didn't think I knew what I was doing. I couldn't come up with the solutions that everyone else was coming up with. And then one day I put my stupid idea on the table. Now that is your words. I put my stupid idea on the table and it changed the conversation. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yes. So I finished UNC Chapel Hill in the mid-'70s. And of course, in my early days at Duke Energy and a few years at Arthur Andersen, it was not unusual, of course, for me to be the first and the only. and just sitting around a number of tables talking about the challenges and opportunities, I was struck that I never came up with the same solutions that the other folks around the table came up with. And you have to know that I really wondered about my own smarts. Am I just not as capable? Am I dumb? I don't come up with the same things. And then one day I put my stupid idea out on the table, and it changed the conversation. And we all worked together towards something that actually turned out to be very, very good. So the lesson for me from that was that I wasn't stupid. I was just different. I had different experiences from the other people around the table. My problem solving efforts are different. The way I process is just different from everybody else. And how dare me not put my ideas on the table once I discovered that.
That's fascinating perspective, especially for young people to hear. How dare you not put your ideas on the table?
Yeah.
But that difference goes way back. I remember you talking to me a little bit about your childhood, and you said, and I kind of want to hear you say it again. You said something about the way you saw people during the week and the way you saw them on the weekend.
Yeah, and I don't know how this or why this happened as a young boy, but I grew up in federal projects in Greensboro, North Carolina, and for some reason I was observant. I was rather quiet, but I noticed that that there were adults that I respected a great deal. During the week, they were just stand-up people. On the weekend, they were different people. And as a young fellow, I recognized that what made them different was alcohol. They were just very, very different people, and they were people that I didn't want to be growing up. So I observed it, and that instructed how I would live my life going forward. I wouldn't allow anything or anybody to control who I was, how I presented myself, just the being that I am. No substance, no person. But it was just striking that as a young boy, I observed that, and that instructed how I would live my life.
Well, what strikes me about that is that you knew that you had a choice. I don't know at that age that I knew I had a choice. I mean, I think some of us, I can't speak for everybody else, but as I grew up, I think I kind of allowed the world to kind of tell me who I was. And it seems to me that in our conversations, as you navigated your childhood and what you saw around you, you knew you had a choice and you decided, and not sides.
Yeah, I wish I could tell you what caused that. I mean, I was even different from my two brothers. We had a tremendous amount of freedom. Our mother had to work. So we had a lot of freedom. And the choices that they made were very different from the choices that I made. And I had to be willing to be different from family members. I had to be willing to be different from friends. And I had friends, and we played all manner of sports. But I chose to be different in the way that I lived my life and presented myself, and the choices that I made. And in this notion of peer pressure, I have to wonder too where I got the strength. But I'm very, very happy that I recognized that I had the choice to be who I wanted to be and chose that path.
Well, one of the things I hear in you when you talk about those things, or let me say it differently. One of the things I don't hear when you talk about other people and their choices, even the people that you had such respect for that changed on the weekends, is condemnation. And in any of our conversations, I've never heard that. I've actually only really heard compassion. And I remember you talk about your brothers and the choices that they have made, and it being different from yours. I want to get back to that in a little bit. But if you would kind of fast forward to us, how you got to college. So Greensboro at the time was segregated, right?
Absolutely.
Right. And you were going to college for sure. And tell me a little bit about how you got there.
so I was a good student, but football was my life, and football was going to be what got me to college. And so my senior year, preparing to be the football superstar at Dudley High School in Greensboro, I dislocated my shoulder, and had to go to the hospital. But we had to wait for a few hours for a white orthopedic doctor to come across town. There were no Black orthopedic doctors, but it was an all-Black hospital in Greensboro. And so he came, he put my shoulder back in place. I had to start making office visits. And for some reason, Dr. Maltsby took a real interest in me. But one day we had this very interesting conversation during one of the office visits. He asked me, well, are you going to college? And I said, of course I'm going to go to college. I'm going to go play football. Well, my assumption, of course, was that I was going to go to an HBCU to play football. And he asked me, well, have you been accepted anywhere? Well, you know, as crazy as this sounds, nobody had ever asked me that before. And so I stumbled, but I said, well, yeah, I've been accepted at Carolina. And he had to have thought that I was the craziest person he had ever met. But he said, we're going to Chapel Hill. And so he took off work one day and he drove me to Chapel Hill, and we met with the football coaches there. We met with folks in the administration there, a full day. But by the time I left, I knew who my roommate would be. I knew where I would be staying. I knew I'd be eating at the training table, and so forth and so on. And that was another event that just changed the whole trajectory of my life. Somebody stepping in that I didn't really know very well, but intervening in such a way.
Right. And then you had another intervention in college too, didn't you? Via a girlfriend.
Yeah, that's exactly right. A girlfriend that had become a part of a Christian fellowship. And I was pleased with her being a part of the fellowship. That shouldn't affect me, right? Well, she didn't see things that way, and she started really testifying and witnessing to me. And one day she actually brought another male member who I had respect for to my dorm room. And they talked to me for a number of hours, and I decided at that point in my dorm room that I would submit and that I would give my life to God, and that was another transformational point in my life. But it was somebody else, other people coming and really talking. I had the choice. Yeah. But I decided, considering the person that I was, that I would give my life to God at that point.
Yeah, but there was something there. You had a little conversation with this God that you didn't know very well. And there was something there that kind of propelled you further. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this is going to be another story that folks around this collective table will say, this has got to be one of the craziest people in the world. So I majored in accounting. I didn't have a clue what accounting was when I decided to major in it, but the only other thing I knew was business. There were a small number of people majoring in accounting, a larger number of people majoring in business. So I assumed that the folks majoring in accounting would be the ones to get the jobs. Well, it didn't take me long to realize why there were so few people majoring in accounting. It whooped me. I had a challenge trying to understand it and grasp it. But after I accepted God in my life, I started reading the Bible. And there's just some amazing accounts in the Bible of what God has done and so forth and so on. And I'll be honest with you, I just had to question, is this really true? Does God do these things? Can God really do these things? And the voice within me, the voice that I heard within me said, so you want to try me? Let's let the CPA exam be the test. Well, Angela, I was a C accounting student. I made C's in all of my accounting classes. I was not somebody that should be thinking about taking the CPA exam. And I never really intended to. But now, here was God challenging me, or he was taking my challenge. You want to challenge me, you want to test me, let's let the CPA exam be the test. So now I was going to be taking the CPA exam. Now I decided that I needed to go back and learn so much accounting that I did not learn before. Now imagine this is another part of the crazy story. A C accounting student teaching himself accounting. What kind of sense does that make? But I prepared and I prayed and I prepared and I prayed and I took the exam 2.5 days and I passed it the first time. Back then, maybe
people do that.
I'm sorry.
What percentage of people actually pass that exam?
So back then, I think it was 10% of the people that took the exam passed it the first time. And now I was one of the 10% that passed it the first time. So there was no doubt whatsoever in my mind that this God was real and he could do anything in my life. And that was transformational. That experience became the basis for everything that happened in my career.
Everything.
Yes, just having the courage to take on all of these new challenges that were offered again. I was always the first. I was oftentimes the only. So every new offer was a challenge, and I could go back to that CPA experience and say that the God Almighty can do anything through me.
Yeah. And so you said something in telling that story. You said the answer within me. And
Yes.
and that really struck me. So let me ask you a more philosophical question. Do you believe that God resides within us, or is he external to us?
Yeah. So for people around the table that might be about to turn the screen off, I don't verbally hear, but I do believe that I've learned to listen, and so I do believe that God's spirit abides within, and that His spirit will be our conscience. We're born with a conscience, and we listen to our conscience, or we don't listen to our conscience. But I believe that His spirit would be our conscience if we learn to listen, and I learned to listen.
And so you talked to me about as you went through some of your management roles at Duke Energy, you talked about your experience with some managers and how you were determined that you were not going to, when you received a position like that, you were not going to treat people the way they treated people. What informed that? Because that's a different tact than everyone takes, right?
Yeah.
You were again making a decision to be different, even though you already were different.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, it does cause you to think back to the childhood experiences of seeing how people reacted weekday during versus the weekend. But yes, oftentimes being the only one, I kind of felt isolated a lot of times, even in receptions, because everybody else knew one another. They would gather, they would talk, and so forth and so on, and so I didn't always feel included. But all at the same time, there were many managers that managed through intimidation, control. I'm in control. You do what I say. And so, just being observant, I would always say, boy, if I ever became a supervisor or a manager, I would never treat people this way. If a company goes out and hire really talented people, why do you not take advantage of the talent? Why would you treat them, allow them to feel isolated, not apart, and so forth and so on? And so I determined for myself, even before becoming a supervisor or manager, what kind of supervisor or manager I would be. And it was the opposite of what I experienced so often.
Now, was that also informed by your religious experience and your getting into that religion a little bit more? Or was it inspired because you felt like someone was walking with you in the things that you wanted to do?
So it was definitely informed by, but first of all, my own person and how I wanted to be treated. I knew what motivated me, and so I wanted to be treated a certain way, and I wanted to treat other people a certain way. And it wasn't just intentionally trying to live the golden rule or anything, but that was the essence of it. And yes. I believe that all of those folks around that were my coworkers and supervisors and managers, we were all created, in my opinion, by the same God, and all equal. And you ought to treat folks that are equal to you the same. People that were created the same way as you. You ought to treat them with respect and treat them as human, and so forth and so on. So yes, I was definitely informed by my relationship with God, in addition to the person that I had chosen to be.
But you also had to manage up, manage sideways, and everything else. So you were in company with all of the people that didn't believe the way that you believed. How did you handle that? Again,
Yeah.
how do you navigate being so different? Because I think in our world right now, this is a little more norm. I mean, yeah, still encounter, unfortunately, managers that are like that. And when I was telling my son about you, he goes, yeah, mom. He said, there are two type of people in the world. The ones that say, I went through it, so you'll have to go through it too. And then the other ones that say, I went through it and I'll make sure you don't have to.
Mm.
And so
Well, you know,
we see you as the second, but you had to deal with the first. So how do you manage being different on so many levels and still being different on that? I mean, you really have to manage in so many different directions because you're still responsible for your family. You're responsible for that income. You still want to do well and you want to progress. So how do you manage that?
yeah. Well, first of all, I would dare say that if I had chosen to be like my supervisors and managers, Angela, I would still have all of my hair. But, but I chose to be different, and my hair jumped out as a result of that. And for me, it just went all the way back to my childhood when I determined that I could be like everybody else, but I wanted something different for me. And so I chose to be different, even though, sometimes you could be isolated being different. And I was sometimes isolated as a child, even though I had friends and so forth. And so I had to determine one of the hardest decisions I made in my career was whether I was going to be like my supervisors or managers, or would I be Stick Williams? And I chose to be Stick Williams. And it was not an easy decision. I had managers. There was one vice president that I reported to in particular. I was a district manager at the time, and he said, I believe that if you had to choose between the employee and the company, you would choose the employee. And I was dumbfounded because I thought the employees were the company. But he said that I was choosing between the employee and the company, and that's the way a number of supervisors and managers looked upon me, and they considered me to be weak. I was a weak supervisor or manager because I didn't believe in the command and control kind of management. But what I can say is that the employees that reported to me saw something that they really liked, and they responded, and we always delivered great results. So I became very willing to take, the pushback and the abuse from supervisors and others, because I saw how the employees that reported to me responded and what they delivered as a result. And all I was doing was allowing them to do what they were more than capable of doing. I wanted them to flourish just like I wanted to flourish. And I gave them the space to do it, and results followed.
Well, so something really important in what you just said is that your ego can't lead the way.
Mm.
In order for you to manage employees in that manner and actually want them to flourish, you cannot be afraid of them.
Yeah.
Right?
And the crazy thing is that if your employees are flourishing, what does that mean about you and your department? Just taking off. What kind of courage does that take?
Right.
Yeah, I guess it takes courage to be different, but it just makes sense to me. Again, if you bring in talented people, you allow them to do what they're capable of doing. Of course, you're directing. You're showing the path that you want. You strike a vision for what it is that you want to create, but then don't constrain them by limiting them to only what you can see, or what you've experienced.
So I'm fascinated by how that might translate in education with teachers and students.
Mm.
And I would imagine Mark Paris probably would have some thoughts on that.
Yeah.
I want to have a quote from Joseph Campbell that I want to say, but I want to say in advance, if I mention religion and I mention Christ or anything like that as myth in Joseph Campbell's language, it's only to include everyone that may be of different religions as well, and try and kind of universalize some of your experience. So I hope you're okay with that.
Yes.
But he says he's a scholar on myths and legends and tracing them through the ancient times, through religions and myths and legends. The images of myth are reflections of spiritual and depth potentialities of every one of us. And in contemplating those, we evoke those powers in our own lives. So how much of your contemplation and your religion do you feel like has motivated you to manage your life the way you have managed it? How much of it is maybe this kind of self-respect of this inner guide that says, I can't go against that because Stick Williams loses something if he does?
Yeah. Well, so I guess maybe the one thing that I haven't said is that I've often reflected, trying to determine why I was the way that I was, but more importantly, why did I have these opportunities? Why was I always the first? Why did I have to be the first? And I had a conversation with God about that. Why do I have to be first? Can't somebody else do this? And so for folks around the table, I was led to the book of Esther in the Bible. And in that book, Esther becomes queen through a beauty contest, and somebody, one of the people in the king's cabinet, is very opposed to the Jews and wants the Jews exterminated. And she tells her uncle who raised her, I can't do anything about this. I can't approach the king. Nobody approaches the king without being summoned. And if I do, I could be killed. And his response to her was, you can't think about yourself in a time like this. If you don't do something, your people are going to be killed. Now, this is what got me. He said to her, perhaps, Esther, you've come to the kingdom for such a time as this. And that crawled all over me. Perhaps you come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Why was I given these opportunities? Well, perhaps the way that I am was for such a time as this. Perhaps I got all of these opportunities for such a time as this, because what I was determined was not only to be the first, but certainly not to be the last. Depending on how I conducted myself, I could have been the last. And I was very, very conscious of that. So I had to be me. I had to rely 100% on God, not rely on my own abilities and my own wisdom, if you will. I had to rely on God within me, the wisdom that he was providing, the doors that he was opening. And I realized that maybe I was there for such a time as this. So it was imperative, Angela, that I be Stick Williams.
Well, that gave me goosebumps, Stick.
So Angela and Stick, sorry to interrupt. We had a question in the chat, and I just wanted to.
So you were serious that people could ask me questions?
They're going to ask you questions.
It's intimidating enough just to talk to Angela. Oh.
We've heard enough of Angela.
Yes, they have.
Now, here's the question for you. This is from Marty Visor, who thanks you for coming. Even seeing you virtually is good enough. And wondering what nonprofit work you're doing now for fun in your retirement.
Yeah, well, Marty, thank you. And it's good to hear your voice. I see Valeda there on the screen. And I wish I could claim the kind of work that she's done. And Marty's been all over the place. It's interesting that you asked me that. I am on the Atrium board. Actually, they've got me on two hospital boards, Charlotte-Mecklenburg Hospital Authority, which is Atrium, and the Wake Forest Baptist Medical Hospital Board, Central Piedmont Board of Trustees, the Goodfellows Club, and that's been very interesting. I very much enjoyed that, one that I never would have expected. So I serve on the Renaissance West Board because that community of people is like what I grew up with. And here's a quarterback organization that's really trying to help them navigate and become better. That kind of thing is very, very, very important to me. I serve on the chapter board of the North Carolina Association of Corporate Directors. That's been very interesting. So I'm already getting tired talking about talking about these things. I'm supposed to be retired. You know?
Yeah. Um, so all of these things have guided you. You talked about how your life has given you parables.
Yes.
Can you give me one of the examples of that? And you just gave us one, but there was another one.
Yeah. So I gave you the example of Esther, and God has given me parables. He's given me these stories that relate to my life. That's allowed me to talk to employees when they would come to me. Employees within Duke Energy considered me to be very, very accessible. And so it's amazing the number of folks that came to talk about personal things or talk about career. The crazy thing, Angela, and I may have told you this, was that, of course, being uptown, there were thousands of bank employees uptown, and I was shocked at the number of bank employees that wanted to come and speak and so forth. So I'm not sure what the other one was. There's one about the children of Israel leaving Egypt, and I don't know if that's the one you're referring to or another. Can you give me a hint?
Yeah, you said something about giants. I think it was a talk. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was invited to speak at the YMCA prayer breakfast a couple of years ago, and so I wanted to talk about giants in our life, and I used as an example the children of Israel leaving the promised land leaving Egypt under the leadership of Moses, and they crossed the Red Sea on dry land. See, that doesn't make sense. How do you cross the Red Sea on dry land? But they crossed the Red Sea on dry land. They had manna from heaven. They had a cloud by day. In the desert, they had a cloud by day for covering, but they had a pillar of fire by night. They had manna, as I mentioned. When they got tired of manna, they got quail to just come in and swoop in on them. They got water from a rock, and then they made it to the promised land. And they sent in 12 spies to spy out the land. And they came back after 40 days and they had vegetables, they had grapes, they had fruit. And they said to the people, this land is just like God promised. This is a land flowing with milk and honey. And then there was the but. And the but was there were giants in the land. And so my point is that all of us face giants. Every one of us face giants. My giants are different than your giants, but all of us face giants. And when you confront a giant, what do? Do you just focus on the giant, or do you focus on your strength? And my strength was God, and He had seen me through so many different situations that when I confront a giant, I can say, God, I can't wait to see what you're going to do this time. That's the confidence I got. My confidence is not, well, Stick, you've done this and done this, so, this giant is going to be intimidated by you. No, I am not stupid enough to rely on my own strength and my own abilities. I know what He's done in my life. God, I can't wait to see what you're going to do this time.
So you're connected to something bigger than yourself. And that's the belief that drives you into all of these different areas of giants and things that are fearful. Actually, you said something too in that story. They were in the wilderness.
Yes.
I can't remember exactly what happened that put them there.
So after they heard the report about the giants, they were ready to stone Moses to death. And God caused them to spend 40 years in the wilderness, that generation, because He wanted that generation to die off and not go into the promised land. So they spent 40 years in the wilderness, and then He brought them out. So Moses didn't go to the promised land. Those adults that doubted, that were scared of the giants, didn't go into the promised land except for Caleb and Joshua. But But the thing that got me was that they had crossed the Red Sea on dry land. You know, how can you be concerned about giants if you cross the Red Sea on dry land? How can you be concerned about giants if you're being fed from heaven? You know, I'm sorry. I'm supposed to not be emotional about this thing, but that's how strongly I feel about, you know, what God has done in my life, the abilities that he's given, and at every stage when I've needed him, the wisdom that I've had is listening for him and going to him rather than relying upon Stick Williams.
So one of the things you had said were those people were stuck in like the wilderness for years.
Yes.
Right. And it's interesting to me because the way I thought about it was as an analogy as a human being, when you are removed from who you truly are, you're stuck in the wilderness. Right? When you're connected to who you truly are, which you were connected as a young man, deciding this is what I want to be, this is what I don't want to be. And then as an older young man, you became connected to something bigger than you, right? That gave you reasons to believe in true and noble things.
Yes.
Their value. You knew in your heart that's what you wanted. I don't know about everybody else, but I have a personal belief that most of us come into the world that way. One of the reasons why we all love Disney movies. We want to believe that those things are valuable, that those are the things, right?
Yeah.
And so religion isn't accessible to all of us, and each religion isn't accessible to everybody, right? So we've kind of lost in our culture, we've lost these myths and we've lost these legends and we've lost these things that let me, because Maria can say it much better than I can. Maria Popova had this great quote that I thought was, it just really reminded me of your story and what you had to say. She said, the art of living lies largely in training the eye to attend to what is beautiful and noble. An argument all the more urgent amid our present culture of rampant cynicism and a media ecosystem that traffics in outrage as its chief currency.
Yeah.
And I wonder often if that as a culture is kind of where we are.
Yeah.
And if religion isn't, any one religion can't be for everybody, right? They each speak to us in different ways, and we all have to find our way through that. But where is even the prompt to find our way?
Yeah.
And I'd be interested to what Mike Relon might have to say on this topic. I see you over there. Is it important? Is it important for a culture and kids and people who are trying to make sense of who they are? And I think of the middle schoolers, which Kristen absolutely adores that middle school age. And that is the most, she would call it liminal space there is. I hear you trying to figure yourself out. Your hormones, your body's not right. Your mind's not right. Nothing's right. Right. And so where in our culture do we find these things?
Wow.
And is it important?
Yeah, that's a scary question that you asked. It's kind of like we've reduced everything to our knowledge, no knowledge beyond our knowledge. We've reduced everything to our knowledge, and we're shaping culture and everything according to our knowledge. And it's scary because, you know, I for me, you know, if I reduced everything about me to just my own experience and my knowledge, my life is very, very, very limited, and I don't accomplish very much, and I don't do for other people, you know, what you know, things that might really make a difference. And I'm wondering, you know, if as you're indicating, if that's what we're losing as a nation, and what does that mean for us as a nation going forward if we've reduced everything to just how we individually envision things, and there can't be anything greater than that. That's scary.
Yeah, Angela, let's bring Mike on stage. David, can you pull him up?
So we're going to have some real wisdom now,
Stick.
huh?
See,
Mike.
so yeah, I think what Stick just pointed to, I think it's important for kids of all ages to talk. So at Stanford, they have three big components for their life design lab, which has gone incredibly well over the last 15 years, that they have created through those years of wisdom to try to help more Americans become happy and prosperous, right? We have too many Americans who chase things and for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
And I put in the chat, they need to hear Stick talk. They need to hear successful people talk. And we can think of the kids at CMS where half of them are below the poverty level with limited social capital of the ability to interact and be able to talk to successful people. Many times their parents would love to help them. They're working at 3 jobs and, the kids are limited. And so, there's that opportunity that we need to understand that, and they're pretty smart at Stanford, right? They can point to a pretty extensive pedagogical map, but really they boil it down and tell their kids, okay, you can look at the pedagogy, or here it is. You need to talk to people, right?
Yeah.
You need to become curious and that opportunity to engage. And so one thing is that whole experience. The other thing is, people have different cultures, different backgrounds, and we develop a better understanding of different people coming, and appreciation, for people coming from different backgrounds. And so I think that ability of fostering that conversation and really putting it as a priority, right? That for a lot of different reasons, we need to talk to people and have these conversations, and helping our youth kind of find who they are, earlier on, and what they like, what they're interested in, those values that are going to be able to drive their life by talking to people.
Yeah, Mike, it's interesting that you say that, and I'll mention something that I heard that Angela's son, one of her sons, said that is he was talking about the fact that everybody has a story, and how amazing would this world be? How amazing would this country be if we took the time to listen to people's story? And really get to know them and get to know their heart and so forth by just listening to their stories, But that's exactly what you're describing.
And if I can add, and I'm going to leave and not talk anymore, but what Stick said at Stanford, as one of their key components, they tell their kids, you got to tell your story for the rest of your life, because other kids are coming up behind you. Other people are coming up behind you, and they have to hear your story.
Absolutely.
How you went through your life. So that becomes, again, a key component of telling the story and talking to people.
Yeah.
Mike, and you bring up a really good point. One of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation with Stick is because we can talk about a religion. We can talk about the stories and the humanities and the Greek mythologies and all of these wonderful heroic things. But do we recognize it when it shows up in someone's real life? When you have a real life living example of the hero's journey, do we recognize it as such? Or are we only living in this romanticized version of the literature stories and the religious stories and all of these other things? And I wanted to have this conversation with Stick because that's what I saw in him. That hero's journey of, this is where I started out. I connected to something bigger than myself that not only served everyone else, but also served me and my family. Because what good is it if you destroy yourself? Right? The goal is to bring yourself to life and to show other people what that looks like and to share that with them. But that story is what we read about. And here it is in a living being, and we can't disregard that. We have to show that, I think. And because I don't know how else if education is making the next generation, if education is forming our society, but yet we're not talking about these things and we're trying to take the arts and the humanities out of it, and it's becoming this very transactional pushing curriculum and not really tying it to their lives and to some of these stories that I think naturally human beings gravitate. What kind of society are we building, and whose responsibility is it to dig in?
Wow. Well, it's kind of interesting that what we're trying to do with regards to censoring the past. There were a lot of ugly things in the past. In my opinion, it's imperative that we keep those stories on the forefront, and we talk about it and talk about why people, made choices and so forth, not just to completely, put all of that stuff in the trash bin but what you're talking about too, about taking the humanities, taking the art, taking all of the things that we consider to be great in the past out of education, that's really scary. I mean, what do we do to our children and their future, their ability to navigate, their ability to create when we take all of that away?
Yeah, I don't disagree with you there. Valeda gave me a couple of books to read. One of them she suggested, and I won't say his name right. Is it W.E.B. Du Bois?
The boys.
Du Bois. So I'm reading his words and knowing about the time when he was writing, and overwhelmed at his articulation and what he could do, and the way he does it makes it all the more amazing that he does it.
Yeah.
So
You
to
know,
your point, it's context, and you see this beauty out of something really, really painful. But if we don't tell these stories and tell them in a very human way, then we don't see the human cost.
yeah. It's kind of interesting that you say this, and I hadn't really planned on going there, but when I found myself in situations in career in particular, and asked myself, is it worth it? I mean, is it worth me putting up with this? The thing that always came back to me was that there were folks before me during the civil rights movement in particular, and even before then, they didn't have the opportunities that I had, but they fought for the opportunities that I had. And shame on me if now I've got the opportunity and I don't take advantage of it, and if I don't give my best. And when I think of the creativity of folks that were in slavery, and some of the things that they created, and then after slavery, and listen to the music and look at the art and so forth, and see that kind of creativity in that kind of environment, oh my gracious.
How could they be so alive under such oppression?
That's exactly right. And what do I learn from that?
Yeah, we
Now
all.
you guys are getting me excited. We probably
Well, that's what we're here for. And you gave me goosebumps again. Thanks for that. Appreciate that. But yeah, so I want to point out it's 12:50, and we've always promised everybody that we would give you that heads up if you need to duck out early. It is 12:50, but we're going to hang out here for just a little bit longer. If anyone else has any questions, please jump in. I'm happy to talk to Stick all day long, and it's not a problem. But you guys, you're free to jump in. And so one of the things that Joseph Campbell also said that comes to my mind, he said, people have the notion that to change the world, we must shift it around, change the rules. He says, no, bring it to life. Find in your own case where your life is and be alive yourself.
Wow.
Everything vital vitalizes.
Wow.
How's that hit you?
Yeah, I love that. That's amazing. But that's exactly right. And those things can happen one person at a time, one encounter, one interaction at a time, or, for a teacher, it can happen in 30 different lives. one day at a time. Just because you chose to be alive and cause the subject matter or the books to come alive in the mind of a child and so forth and so on. And I agree. You changed the world that way. For me, and so, I went to all Black schools through high school. And graduated from Dudley High School in Greensboro, and then all of a sudden I was on the Chapel Hill campus. But in those all Black schools, we didn't have great resources. We always had hand-me-down books and so forth and so on. But those teachers wouldn't allow us to have a slavery kind of mentality or a second degree kind of mentality. They made everything come alive, and they pushed you to believe what you could be. And so any contributions that I've made with regards to education in this community, it goes back to what those teachers did in my life and what they caused in my mind's mind, my mind's eye.
Well, what you said is really huge, because one of the things I think we fail to address well is the psychological barriers to success. So it's one thing to continue to push content, but if we aren't recognizing as what I want to say, the elders in the community or teachers or anyone who has any impact on a child, if we're not recognizing, and I say child even as college students, Mark, the fact that there are barriers in their mind to their own success, that's huge.
Yeah, well, a lot of George W. Bush got a lot of criticism for this, but he bowled me over when he said that the most significant racism in education, but in our community, our country, was the racism of low expectation. And boy, he bowled me over when he said that. He nailed it. And I couldn't believe that people were giving him so much grief. But when you've got low expectations of children, that's probably what you're going to get.
Yeah, I have nothing to add to that.
So I'd love to interject again, because there's a lot of interest in the chat stick. This is a significant point in history for us, the events of yesterday. Tony Freeman had a comment, really appreciating your intersection between faith and leadership. And thinking about that significant moment yesterday, what do we say to people who may not agree?
That may not agree with the verdict?
I'm assuming that's the question, but Tony, if you want to clarify.
Hey, Stick, yeah, absolutely. The verdict, the process, we've become a very divided society. And so how do we bridge? And I really appreciate your use of faith as a way to lead.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And my goodness, I'm glad you didn't warn me that folks like Tony would be on today. I've just had some wonderful engagements with her through the years. That's a tough question. So for me, in a situation like that, and especially when you got a verdict like that, it's important not to gloat. And it's not important to use that as division, but to really try to bring it in perspective. I mean, here was a man that was on the ground, and the life was pushed out of him. As a human being, you got to look at that person as a human being and what happened to him, and the fact that his family, his friends will never have him again, and that there are consequences to things like that. And but I think that in the society, in our culture now, it's about winners and losers. And we won this time. We're going to position ourselves to continue to win. You're always going to lose. As a matter of fact, you deserve to lose. And that's a prescription for disaster, I think, as far as a culture is concerned. But you don't gloat in a situation, and you don't hold it over somebody's head. You cause people to see, this is right, and this is why it's right.
I love what you said about looking at him as a human being. because all in all, I think that's what binds us together.
Yeah,
That was a human life taken.
that's
And
exactly right.
there's a bottom line there.
Yeah.
Mm. Stick. What a note to end on there. Lovely. I am so glad that you are with us today. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah.
Does
Well,
anybody else have any last questions for Stick? No? Okay. Well,
Angela, I thought you were taking a big chance having me on a Wisdom Wednesday, but you were delightful. You were delightful.
Well, thank you. You know what I love so much about you, and you remind me of my husband in this way. So y'all, I sent Stick Emerson's essays. I'm sure he opened it and went, I don't know what that dude just said. Because my husband would have been the same way. I'm not reading that, but he doesn't read it because he lives it. It's part of his life and it's part of who he is. So it is redundant for him to read it. So you were the humanities in this situation, Stick, and I thank you for being our guinea pig. And I really thank everybody else for being here today. I want to also thank Stick for his generosity of his spirit and his time, and all the conversations I've been able to have with him has been a gift to me, and I do appreciate it. We are excited to announce our next forum guest, Yale Divinity Scholar Ebony Marshall Turman. This event will take place on May 19th at 6:30 p.m. I'm sorry. I hope you'll join us. And thank you to our producer, David Phillips, for always making us look good. We're here for a little bit longer if anyone wants to stay and has anything they want to talk about. Otherwise, we will see you at our next event. Thank you so much for being here.